The transformation taking place across Europe is one of the most debated and misunderstood developments of the 21st century. It is a story that touches economics, migration, religion, identity, politics, history, and the future of an entire continent. Some people describe it as a demographic revolution. Others see it as a natural consequence of globalization and modern mobility. Still others fear that Europe is losing its traditional cultural identity. Whatever perspective one adopts, there is little doubt that Europe today is undergoing profound social change. For centuries Europe stood at the center of global influence. It led the world in scientific discovery, industrial development, military power, technological innovation, and the creation of modern political institutions. European empires extended their influence across vast regions of the globe. European languages, educational systems, legal frameworks, and economic models shaped societies on nearly every continent. The modern world, in many respects, emerged from European intellectual and political traditions. Today, however, Europe finds itself confronting a different set of questions. Economic competition from emerging powers has intensified. Birth rates have fallen dramatically. Populations are aging. Labor shortages affect multiple industries. Political polarization is increasing. Debates over immigration, religion, and national identity dominate election campaigns. At the center of many of these discussions stands the growing Muslim population of Europe. The increase in Europe's Muslim population is one of the most significant demographic developments of recent decades. Estimates vary because many European countries do not collect detailed religious data through official censuses. Nevertheless, researchers generally agree that the Muslim population has risen substantially since the late 20th century. In the early 1990s, estimates often placed the Muslim population of Europe at around 20 million. By the mid-2020s, many studies suggested figures approaching 50 million or more across the continent, depending on methodology and geographic scope. The distribution of this population is not uniform. Countries such as France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Austria, Germany, Sweden, and the United Kingdom have relatively large Muslim communities. In France, Muslims are estimated to comprise close to 10% of the population. Similar proportions exist in parts of Belgium and the Netherlands. Germany hosts one of Europe's largest Muslim populations, largely due to migration from Turkey and later refugee arrivals from various conflict zones. Yet an interesting paradox exists. In several countries where Muslim populations remain extremely small, anti-Muslim sentiment and fears regarding Islam can be particularly strong. Nations in Eastern Europe, where Muslims constitute a tiny fraction of the population, sometimes witness intense political debates about Islam despite having very limited direct interaction with Muslim communities. This phenomenon raises an important question: how do perceptions of Islam form in societies where few Muslims actually live? The answer lies partly in media narratives, political messaging, and broader anxieties about cultural change. Human beings often fear what they do not know. When direct contact is limited, perceptions are frequently shaped by television reports, social media content, political speeches, and viral videos. These sources often emphasize dramatic incidents while ignoring ordinary daily realities. At the same time, anti-immigration and nationalist movements have gained political strength across many European countries. Parties that were once considered fringe organizations now participate in national governments or influence mainstream political discourse. Immigration, border control, cultural integration, and national identity have become central themes in political campaigns. Supporters of these movements argue that Europe faces challenges related to integration, social cohesion, security, and cultural preservation. Critics argue that migrants and Muslims are often used as convenient scapegoats for broader economic and social problems that have deeper structural causes. To understand how Europe arrived at this point, one must examine the continent's post-war history. The roots of modern demographic change stretch back to the devastation caused by the First and Second World Wars. Together these conflicts resulted in tens of millions of deaths and left much of Europe physically and economically shattered. Cities were destroyed, industries collapsed, infrastructure was ruined, and entire generations of young workers disappeared. Following the Second World War, Western European governments faced an enormous challenge. They needed to rebuild their economies rapidly, but they lacked sufficient labor. Factories required workers. Construction projects required manpower. Transportation networks needed employees. Industrial expansion demanded a large workforce that domestic populations alone could not provide. Governments therefore began recruiting workers from abroad. Germany introduced its famous Gastarbeiter, or guest worker, program. Workers arrived primarily from Turkey but also from other regions. France recruited labor from former colonies such as Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia. Britain welcomed migrants from South Asia and other parts of its former empire. Belgium and the Netherlands signed agreements with countries including Turkey and Morocco. The assumption behind these policies seemed straightforward. Workers would arrive temporarily, help rebuild the economy, earn money, and eventually return home. Policymakers largely viewed migration as an economic arrangement rather than a long-term social transformation. However, reality unfolded differently. People who arrive in a country rarely remain isolated economic units. They form families, establish communities, build businesses, develop friendships, and create roots. Family reunification policies enabled spouses and children to join workers who had originally migrated alone. Communities gradually expanded. What began as temporary labor migration evolved into permanent settlement. By the 1970s and 1980s, second-generation children were being born and raised throughout Europe. These children often spoke European languages fluently, attended local schools, and identified strongly with the countries in which they grew up. They were not temporary visitors. Europe was their home. Subsequent historical events accelerated this process. The Balkan conflicts of the 1990s displaced large numbers of Bosnian and Kosovar Muslims. Refugees sought safety throughout Europe. Later, wars in Iraq and Afghanistan generated additional migration. The Syrian civil war produced one of the largest refugee crises in modern history. Political instability, violence, and economic hardship in various regions continued pushing people toward Europe. These developments occurred alongside another important trend: demographic decline among native European populations. Across much of Europe, birth rates have fallen below replacement levels. Many countries now face shrinking populations and rapidly aging societies. As larger generations retire, fewer young workers remain available to support pension systems, healthcare services, and economic growth. Labor shortages have consequently emerged in numerous sectors. Healthcare systems increasingly rely on immigrant doctors, nurses, and caregivers. Technology industries recruit talent internationally. Transportation networks, construction projects, agriculture, hospitality, and manufacturing all depend heavily on migrant labor. This creates a complicated contradiction. Many politicians campaign on reducing immigration, yet businesses and public services frequently depend on immigrant workers to function effectively. Economists often argue that without continued migration, many European countries would struggle to maintain economic growth and social welfare systems. Meanwhile, the descendants of earlier migrants continue integrating into European societies. Muslim background citizens increasingly participate in politics, business, education, journalism, academia, medicine, law, and public administration. Many have become prominent figures in national life. At the same time, public anxiety regarding cultural change has also increased. For some Europeans, demographic shifts raise questions about national identity. They wonder how traditional customs, languages, values, and cultural norms may evolve in increasingly diverse societies. These concerns are not necessarily rooted in hostility. In many cases, they reflect uncertainty about rapid social transformation. However, political actors often amplify these anxieties. Throughout history, periods of economic uncertainty have frequently produced movements that seek simple explanations for complex problems. When living costs rise, wages stagnate, housing becomes expensive, or employment opportunities decline, people naturally search for causes. Immigration can become a highly visible target because migrants are physically present and easily identifiable within public debate. Yet economic challenges often result from factors far beyond migration. Globalization has transformed manufacturing industries. Automation has changed labor markets. Competition from rapidly developing economies has altered international trade patterns. Technological disruption affects entire sectors. Financial crises and policy decisions shape economic outcomes in ways that immigration alone cannot explain. Nevertheless, political messaging often focuses on migrants because such narratives are emotionally powerful and easy to communicate. Social media has intensified this dynamic. A single incident involving a migrant can spread across platforms within hours. Videos circulate rapidly. Commentary follows. Algorithms prioritize content that generates strong emotional reactions such as anger, fear, outrage, or shock. As millions view and share the same material, public perception can become heavily influenced by isolated events. This creates a distorted picture of reality. Most people, regardless of religion or background, spend their days working, studying, raising families, and living ordinary lives. Millions of Muslims across Europe contribute to society without attracting attention because normal behavior rarely becomes news. By contrast, exceptional incidents receive extensive coverage precisely because they are unusual. As a result, a small number of highly publicized events can shape perceptions of entire communities. Another dimension of Europe's changing religious landscape involves secularization. Across much of Western Europe, traditional religious affiliation has declined significantly over recent decades. Church attendance has fallen. Many people identify as non-religious or secular. Religious institutions often struggle to attract younger generations. This trend affects multiple Christian denominations and reflects broader cultural changes associated with modernization. At the same time, Muslim communities generally maintain higher levels of religious participation. Mosques remain active. Religious education continues within families and communities. Religious identity often plays a stronger role in daily life. Some observers therefore perceive a contrast between declining Christian participation and growing Muslim visibility. This contrast sometimes fuels narratives about religious competition, even though the reality is considerably more complex. Adding further complexity is the phenomenon of religious conversion. Although converts represent only a small portion of overall Muslim populations, thousands of Europeans have embraced Islam over recent decades. Their reasons vary widely. Some cite spiritual fulfillment, others describe intellectual curiosity, personal relationships, or philosophical exploration. Many converts report that they were searching for answers to questions regarding meaning, morality, purpose, and existence. Such conversions attract significant attention because they challenge assumptions that religious change only flows in one direction. While secularization remains a dominant trend in many societies, some individuals continue seeking spiritual frameworks and religious commitment. The broader debate about Islam in Europe also intersects with historical memory. Relations between Europe and the Muslim world span more than 14 centuries. These interactions include periods of conflict, cooperation, trade, intellectual exchange, and cultural influence. Medieval Islamic civilizations made substantial contributions to mathematics, medicine, astronomy, philosophy, architecture, and literature. Many classical works preserved and expanded by Muslim scholars later influenced European intellectual development. Knowledge traveled across civilizations through trade routes, translations, universities, and scholarly exchanges. The history of Europe and the Muslim world cannot be reduced solely to conflict. It is also a history of mutual influence and shared development. Nevertheless, historical memories of military confrontations, including the Crusades and other conflicts, continue influencing cultural narratives. Historical events are often simplified and politicized to support contemporary agendas. Different groups emphasize different aspects of the past depending on the arguments they wish to make about the present. In recent years, geopolitical developments have further complicated matters. Terrorist attacks carried out by extremist groups generated fear and heightened security concerns throughout Europe. These attacks received enormous media attention and understandably shocked public opinion. Although the overwhelming majority of Muslims condemned such violence, extremist actions often affected broader perceptions of Islam. At the same time, many Muslims felt unfairly associated with crimes they neither supported nor participated in. This contributed to feelings of alienation among some communities and intensified debates regarding integration, discrimination, and social cohesion. Political parties across Europe responded in different ways. Some advocated stricter immigration controls while emphasizing civic integration and national values. Others promoted multicultural approaches and diversity initiatives. Far-right movements often adopted more confrontational rhetoric, portraying immigration and Islam as existential threats to European civilization. Electoral successes for nationalist parties in countries such as France, Italy, Austria, Germany, the Netherlands, and elsewhere reflect broader voter dissatisfaction with existing political systems. However, support for these parties stems from multiple concerns, including economic insecurity, dissatisfaction with elites, skepticism toward globalization, and distrust of established institutions. It would therefore be inaccurate to attribute their rise solely to attitudes toward Muslims. The United Kingdom provides an instructive example. British politics traditionally revolved around two dominant parties. Yet recent years have witnessed increasing fragmentation. Questions surrounding immigration, national sovereignty, cultural identity, and social change have become central political issues. Similar patterns appear elsewhere. In France, debates about secularism, national identity, and integration occupy a prominent place in public discourse. Germany continues grappling with questions surrounding migration, citizenship, and demographic change. Italy and the Netherlands face their own versions of these discussions. Throughout Europe, voters increasingly seek answers regarding the future direction of their societies. One of the most emotionally charged aspects of these debates involves demographic projections. Some commentators argue that Muslim populations will continue growing rapidly and fundamentally transform European societies. Others caution that demographic forecasting is highly uncertain. Birth rates often decline across generations as communities integrate economically and socially. Migration flows fluctuate depending on political circumstances, economic conditions, and international events. Predicting Europe's religious future decades in advance is therefore extremely difficult. What is clear is that Europe today is more religiously and culturally diverse than it was several generations ago. Whether this diversity becomes a source of strength or division depends largely on political choices, social institutions, and public attitudes. A society can respond to diversity in different ways. It can emphasize shared citizenship while respecting differences. It can encourage participation and integration. It can invest in education, economic opportunity, and social cohesion. Alternatively, it can allow fear, suspicion, and polarization to deepen divisions. History suggests that societies function best when individuals feel they belong to a common civic community regardless of ethnic or religious background. Successful integration requires effort from both newcomers and host societies. It involves learning languages, respecting laws, participating economically, and embracing shared civic responsibilities. It also requires equal opportunities and fair treatment. The challenge facing Europe is therefore not merely demographic. It is fundamentally political and social. The continent must determine how to balance cultural continuity with diversity, national identity with pluralism, security with freedom, and economic needs with public concerns. These are not easy questions. They involve competing values and legitimate disagreements. What often gets lost in heated debates is the reality that Europe is not facing a single unified phenomenon called Islam or migration. Instead, it is dealing with millions of individual human beings whose experiences, beliefs, backgrounds, ambitions, and identities vary enormously. Some are recent refugees. Others are third or fourth generation citizens. Some are highly religious. Others are secular. Some run businesses. Others work in factories, hospitals, universities, or government offices. Their lives cannot be reduced to stereotypes. Likewise, Europeans who express concerns about immigration are not all motivated by hatred or prejudice. Many are responding to genuine anxieties about economic security, cultural change, or social stability. Understanding these concerns is essential for meaningful dialogue. The greatest danger emerges when complex realities are replaced by simplistic narratives. When entire communities are blamed for society's problems, polarization increases. When legitimate concerns are dismissed without discussion, resentment grows. Both extremes push societies toward conflict. Europe's future will likely be shaped not by demographic statistics alone but by how effectively its institutions manage diversity, economic transformation, and political disagreement. The continent has repeatedly reinvented itself throughout history. It survived wars, revolutions, ideological struggles, and profound social change. The current transformation represents another chapter in that long historical journey. Whether Europe ultimately becomes more divided or more cohesive will depend on choices made by governments, communities, religious leaders, educators, media organizations, and ordinary citizens. Fear can drive societies apart, but dialogue, understanding, and shared civic values can create common ground. The debate surrounding Islam